The social genius of humanism is something that needs to be comprehended by understanding the collective development of consciousness, by understanding that it takes time for human concepts and human morality to evolve within the context of culture. As the philosopher Hegel said in the introduction to his 1819 lectures on the history of philosophy, he says, "The history of philosophy represents for us the successive struggles undertaken by the human spirit in gaining the wealth of rational knowledge that we now possess. What we are in historical terms, we have as a heritage from all the past endeavors of the human race. This hollow tradition is what passes scientific knowledge down to us. It is a mighty river that grows even mightier and greater the more distant it becomes from its source. It never stands still." So his point is that this consciousness, this qualitative collective consciousness, is always in the process of developing. It is always expanding. It is always growing. And while we might think of certain moral formations within the context of the species to be specific to a religious domain or a specific cultural domain, what we don't understand is that in a broad species context, these claims, these developments, these proclamations, these morals, these principles, these ethics, they represent a progressive line, a progression within consciousness itself. So consider, in the Bible, here are some proclamations, some moral proclamations that very likely represented an expansion of morality within the context of human reasoning. "So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. Love your neighbor as yourself. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." These are not moral principles that are justified. These are not moral principles that come down to the species or into culture with some high level of authority from the God of the universe or from some creator. Now that is of course the claim that is made by religions, but the reality is that these are just moral declarations asserted within the context of culture. More specifically, these are moral declarations, moral propositions that evolved within the context of the species. That's the important point. They evolved within the context of the species. And that is what we have within the form of conceptual knowledge, within the form of idealistic knowledge. We have conceptual development. We inherit concepts that have been developed in a long line of cultural evolution. So take the expansion, the genius expansion in the context of humanism. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights says, in Article 1, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood." Here, there is no religious line. This is the development, the same type of moral development that happened within the species when we have religious proclamations, such as the ones I read from Christianity. This development is no different. The difference is that the consciousness of the content has transformed, because in the humanistic line we have a sublated form of rationality, a sublated morality, meaning we no longer require a deity as a mediating process or a mediator to dictate to us or to appeal to as a means of justifying our moral structures. We have transcended this primitive aspect in our psychology. Now we simply declare all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Article 3, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Article 4, no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. These are moral declarations, moral proclamations, no different from the moral proclamations I read a second ago from Christianity. The difference is these proceed from an expansion in consciousness. They represent a development in morality. But they enter into the species the same way that religious morals enter into the species, not given to humanity by a Most High God or any kind of deity, but created and constructed by the human psyche as that psyche is embedded within culture. There is a progression of cultural thinking, of cultural concepts. Morality has in this sense evolved. Article 5, no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. Christianity was not capable of forming these morals. These ethics are an expansion beyond Christianity. Christianity did not have the capacity, it did not have the development, the moral development within the context of its culture to be able to proclaim and arrive at the genius of these morals. These morals are an expansion. They are more authoritative than the proclamations or declarations that we find in the historical religions because they represent an expansion in consciousness. They embody an awareness that understands existence in a broader totality. Christianity was not able to utter the negation of slavery, but in fact embraced it. The Apostle Paul said, slaves, obey your masters. Secular morality, humanism, has expanded and sublated beyond the primitiveness of these forms. That's why we have in Article 4 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. What I'm trying to get across is that these declarations, these moral premises, these moral propositions, these are no different from other moral propositions or premises that have been declared within the context of human history. The difference is that these are expanded in their nuance. They are expanded in their civility. They are expanded in their respect toward human dignity, toward the freedom of the individual. But they are nonetheless the same type of form that we find in religion. But it is a sublated, expanded form, a form that contains a higher level of intelligence, a form that contains a higher level of genius. Just as we read in the philosopher Hegel, that we inherit our concepts, that we inherit our philosophy. It's the exact same with our moral principles, with our moral understanding. As the human brain expands in its capacity to comprehend the complexity of reality, so its moral structures will expand as well. So its cultural structures will expand as well. Humanism does not need to be ashamed in any way, shape, or form. It can be very proud of its ethics. Its ethics, its morals stand superior, stand more intelligent to the archaic forms that came through historical religions. But that was all those religions were capable of at the time. Humanism represents an expansion in human consciousness, an expansion in human awareness. So just as we have the past proclaiming and asserting and putting forth and creating value structures through the edifice of speech acts, specifically the form of declarations, so too we find this same form in a sublated, expanded content of humanism, putting forth a higher morality, putting forth a more civil morality. Humanism contrasts its civility with the barbarity of the historical morality from the past. That is its claim. That is its authority. That is its refutation of the old forms of morality. And humanism has every right to proclaim itself in exactly the context that historical religion tries to proclaim itself. It does not justify itself. It does not demonstrate that its moral principles are universally true, are absolutely true. It simply proclaimed them into the context of existence. This is the same thing that humanism is doing now and should continue to do. Everyone has a right, says Article 6, to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. These principles are vastly beyond the historical line of religion. Historical religion couldn't even conceive of these moral concepts. The morality inherent within these concepts is so broad, so sweeping, so universal. When you compare it to the historical lines of religion, their moral precepts come out to look primitive, archaic, barbaric. Humanism should be proud. Humanism represents the emancipation and the expansion of human consciousness within the domain of religion, and yet it is not religious because humanism has transcended, it has sublated this mediation process of needing the supernatural to speak forth values, to speak forth principles of meaning. Humanism is a sublated form of religion, which means it doesn't need any gods, and yet it retains the cultural heritage that we find in the historical religions. Only in this heritage we find a higher social genius. We find an expansion in human intelligence.